And we're live. Welcome, ladies, gentlemen, extraterrestrials, hobbits, and cryptids, to our 11th episode of Scuttlebutt with the Phill, where we typically discuss science fiction, fantasy, and horror. I'm here to say a few things, do a few things, and leave a little something of myself to the infamy of the internet. I'm your host, Philip A. Leavenworth. I'm a producer and writer originally from Los Angeles, California, currently living in San Diego, while I return to grad school to pursue an MFA in creative writing and learn how to become a college professor. All this to say, I'm working hard to fulfill my dream of becoming a college professor by day and a filmmaker slash novelist by night. And in this episode, we'll be starting our horror month here on the channel. So, with that, the topic that we'll be discussing is slasher films. So, I have with me my guest, Mac Mayfield. Would you like to introduce yourself for the kind
Hi,
audience?
Philip. Yes, I am so happy to be here. Thank you for having me on.
Of course.
I have a very similar background to you. I'm currently finishing up my bachelor's degree in English, Rhetoric, and Composition at Cal State Long Beach. After which, I'll be pursuing a master's degree in the same thing and hopes to also be a professor one day at a community college and teach not only English, but movies, films, adaptations, anything like that, all that, including slasher films like we're talking about today, interests me so much. So, very happy to be here.
Well, I'm happy to have you. Well, with that, I think we'll start with our first sort of primer for the whole subject. So, for those of you who do not know and are tuning into this episode unaware of what slasher films are, they're typically films where sort of the object of the film is that there's a central figure, usually a villain, that will basically stalk either a bunch of teenagers or kind of younger end adults. And by the end of the film, there usually is only one survivor left. And this has been called the final girl, although it's been a final boy periodically as well. But yeah, generally speaking, my interest in the slasher film genre has kind of been sort of scattershot. It hasn't been like kind of like a whole. It's kind of something I've come to later in life. I mean, I did see the Scream movies when I was a kid, and so my, you know, kind of idea of what a slasher film is kind of comes from that. Even though they tell me that the origin of slasher films really is like your Psychos or some of these giallo films that are these Italian horror films which take the horror genre to a whole nother level. But yeah, that's separate from what we experience in America. But uh, Mac, how would you say you arrived at your interest in slasher films?
I would think like a lot of kids in general, when you hit kind of like your teenage years and you're in high school finally and all that, and you're kind of enveloped by that from other kids, especially around October, like, oh, I saw this new scary movie in the theaters, or oh, I saw this, or have you seen this? That's how I kind of got into it, just kind of word of mouth. And I'm like, oh, yeah, I knew these horror movies and slasher films existed, but I had never seen one until I think I was maybe 13, and the first one I saw was Alien.
Hmm.
And to this day, that is my favorite horror movie slasher film of all time. And as I've gotten older, especially now, I'm 22 years old. I love to do like the scary farm, the horror nights, even horror video games like Dead by Daylight, like all that. I just love so much. I love to be scared.
Well, I think it's a great origin story. I mean, I didn't know that. You're telling me I met you when you were 20?
Yes.
That's insane.
You're
Well,
2 years
anyway,
later.
yeah, I think even despite that, I think you always carry yourself as a lot more wiser than your years. So
So I've been
definitely,
told. Thank you for that.
yeah, I think definitely keep it up. But yeah, I haven't been too much into horror video games, even though I do think I'm not opposed to. I'm not opposed to anything in horror. I'm not really like coming to horror after
Hmm.
the fact. I've kind of always been interested in it in some manner or another. But yeah, I think Alien, your selection of that is interesting. Sometimes even I think I forget that Alien is in fact a horror film, and
I know, I
you know,
know.
it's got science fiction aesthetic, but at the end of the day, it is a horror film.
It's a
I mean,
pure
really,
horror horror
Nope.
film.
Yeah, Ripley is literally the final girl. So I mean,
Exactly.
I mean, I guess you could say the final cat too is involved in that one, but
I was gonna say there's technically two final people in this film.
yeah. Well, it is if you accept cats as people, which I know some people don't. I know I
True.
don't. No, I'm
Very
kidding.
true.
I think that's the allergies to cats speaking. But
Understandable. Understandable.
yeah, yeah. But yeah, generally speaking, I think that's a great pick. As I mentioned before, with the Scream films, I mean, those are kind of like winking back to other slasher films, which they're
Oh
kind of
yeah.
like calling attention to all the tropes of the genre. And yeah, I mean, I don't know how much of the Scream films you've seen, but
I've seen quite a few, and I've seen all like the newer ones too, which I think are pretty dang good.
really,
Oh yeah.
yeah, I haven't seen the more recent ones. I know I've seen at least the first four.
The most recent one, I think it was Scream 6. Was that the most recent one? Yeah, because they're working on Scream 7 right now with Nev Campbell. Scream 6 was
Mhm.
really, really good. If you want
Yeah,
to go
they
see
tell me
that, I
that.
highly recommend it.
Yeah, I gotta because somebody told me that I guess Jenna Ortega is now involved in that franchise too.
Yes, her and I forgot who plays her older sister in those two films, but yeah, in Scream 5 and Scream 6, you see Jenna Ortega's in it, Jack Quaid is in it.
Hmm.
I have like all their faces, but I can't remember those actors' names. But yeah,
Well, I think you've
Courtney
mentioned
Cox
all
is
the
back for a
important
little
ones.
bit. Yeah, it's a whole
Mhm.
thing.
Yeah, no, it sounds curious because I know Jenna Ortega. She's definitely had her experience in horror these days. 'Cause I think she's
Oh yeah.
not only in the Scream films, but she's also in was it Wednesday, which I haven't seen, and
Oh,
then
that's good.
Beetlejuice. I don't know if you've seen the second one.
Yep. Seeing the second one, it's really good. That and she has also been in the first of the X films as well.
Right, right, right. That's another thing I do want to talk about is the X film series. Have you seen all those?
I've had X and Pearl on my list forever. I have not gotten around to seeing them yet. That's probably going to change this month.
Yeah, I'd say that it should. um, yeah, I'll try to talk about those without diving too deep into
Oh,
spoilery territory. But,
I know how they both end. So if you want to go for it, I am all ears.
okay, well, we'll see how much I can actually share. But yeah, no. Generally speaking, I think the origins of slasher films, I think, kind of go back to at least the kind of films we see today. The Psycho. I mean, have you been to the Universal Studios where they have like the Norman Bates
Oh
hotel
yeah,
and the house?
I've actually technically I've stepped foot onto that set and that house. Yes.
Technically,
So every year, how much do you go to Universal like horror nights specifically, if I may ask?
well, I've been wanting to do Horror Nights for the longest time, but I have been to Universal on like numerous occasions.
Okay, so every spooky season they have what they call the terror tram, and every year it's a different theme, but they literally let you out into the back lot and walk around. And every year they do something with the Bates Motel, so you are literally walking on Bates Motel, and then you make that turn and you can go up to the house and take a picture with a scare actor dressed as Norman Bates.
Huh?
So it's
No,
again
that would be
a
entertaining.
really fun time. If you love movies, movie sets, you walk through the Bates Motel, the War of the Worlds, Nope, Jordan Peele's Nope. You walk through that set too. It's so much fun.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, I've always wanted to do it because I know the last couple years in a row they've had um, like a different exhibit for the Halloween Horror Nights. Like they've had, I think it's this year as well. They have a Quiet Place, and I think The
Yes.
Last of Us was last year.
Yeah, that's why I went last year. I needed to see The Last of Us maze. I love that franchise.
Yeah, I never played the video games. I kind of watched walkthroughs of that, but I mean, I wouldn't call it a slasher film. It's more of like a zombie thing.
Oh.
But
Yeah, honestly, and if you talk to someone like me who loves those games and now the series just so much, we always say it's not a horror game. It is not for example, like a slasher game, that's something like where it's a love story, but it has elements of horror and tragedy and loss and terror.
Hmm. Yeah, because when I was watching the TV show, that one season, I think they've already shown the trailer for the second season coming
That
next
they
year.
have.
So
That they have.
yeah, I'm looking forward to it. I mean, the thing that hooked me was obviously like the first couple of minutes where they're, in 1968, he's kind of going over, the possibility of like, viruses. I'm not really afraid of that. It's fungus that I'm really afraid of.
Oh
And then
yeah.
and that was a great opening. And that's what hooked me into it. So
And that was something they added for the show that was never in the original
mhm.
game.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting because I think they told me that all the stuff, like the background stuff like that, and then I think in the episode after that, there's like a scientist in Indonesia, and she's investigating it too. And those
hmm
are those are like things they created strictly for the show.
Yep.
Yeah, I think it adds to it. I think it actually makes the
Oh,
series a lot
absolutely.
better.
That's something that Neil Druckmann loves to do with all of his properties is if he goes back to it in some way or another, like the TV show, because I think the original game came out in 2011 or 2013. So he had like almost 10 years to think about what he wanted to add in for the show.
Yeah, I mean, definitely true. I mean, that's kind of the hopes I'm hoping for. One of my favorite video games, Mass Effect, gets the same treatment at some point, but
Yes.
yeah, we'll see. I don't want to get sent off too much on a
I know.
tangent with that, but
Different conversation for a different day.
yeah, no, we have plenty of shows to come where I'll probably dive into it, but yeah. So my next section was the discussion about the golden age of slashers, which, from what I'm told, is like the 70s and 1980s,
hmm hmm
and this is where we enter the era of your Halloweens, your Friday the 13th, and your Nightmares on
Oh
Elm
yeah.
Streets. So I will disclose that even though I've seen a lot of the Halloween films, I don't think I've ever seen a Friday the 13th movie. But
Oh, okay.
I think I've seen like one or two of the Nightmare on Elm Streets movies. I know I've seen the first one at least.
Yeah, see, I haven't seen any of those, but I have seen, I think, 3 or 4 Friday the 13th movies. I've lost count at this point.
So, what would you say? I mean, you've obviously heard of the characters, so you're familiar with like Michael Myers and Jason
Absolutely.
Voorhees and Freddy Krueger. I mean, that's just from like the
Oh yeah.
culture. So,
Oh yeah.
did you ever? So you said you've never seen which ones?
I've never seen any of like the Nightmare on Elm Street films. That I've seen like clips, and it just seemed just like a tad bit too dark for me, and that's
Hmm,
saying a lot.
interesting. Well, I think I would recommend you check out the first one at the very least. Because I mean,
hmm
Johnny Depp, a young Johnny Depp, shows up for like a little bit, and
Oh, that's right. I remember that. I have seen that clip before. Yes.
yeah, I mean that alone is worth the price of admission just to see him in his 1980s self without any of the attributes we've given him since. But I mean,
Oh
even
yeah.
though you've only heard of these characters, what would you say is one that you are interested in learning more about, or one that you've kind of always liked but you haven't really looked into?
Oh gosh. Are you familiar with the Hellraiser franchise?
I am familiar. I've never actually seen the films.
Me neither. That's the thing. I've heard of them. I've heard like, some people consider them slasher films. A lot of people don't. But like I do know like, the box, whatever box that is from those films and Pinhead. Like those are the ones that I've always like seen and heard about. I know like just nothing about them.
Yeah, I mean, I know like a handful of things because I think my younger brother, is a big fan of Hellraiser. At least that's what he tells
hmm
me.
hmm
And he tells me that I guess all the creatures are something called a Cenobite,
Oh
and
gosh.
yeah, it's like an entire like subset of like horrible creatures that I guess exist in like a separate ethereal plane or something. And so
Oh yeah.
that's intriguing to me, but I've actually not seen any of those films, even though I'm
Mhm.
curious.
Yeah, exactly. Same.
But we'll be getting to, because I mean, that's kind of like the first or the second era of slasher films.
Yeah, I was gonna say
Because
those come a little later, don't they?
yeah, we're gonna get to the. I think they're not until like the later end of the '80s, if I'm not mistaken.
Mm-hmm.
Because I don't think that's a '70s thing, at least as far
No,
as
I
I'm
don't think
aware.
so either.
But in the '80s, there was a lot of like copycats. People would like constantly want to make their own Halloween, Nightmare on Elm Street, and Friday the 13th,
Absolutely.
and especially the Friday the 13th, because I mean I think they loved kind of like, let's just do like these kind of like, it's an excuse to like hire a Playboy model to like do quote unquote acting and then like
Hmm.
have titties fly out, and it's like,
Exactly.
well, why not? And it's like, well, it's the '80s.
And with Friday the 13th especially, like they did something that I'm trying to think right now. I don't think any other horror franchise has done, at least not originally, where in the first film, Jason's not even the killer, it's his mom.
Yeah, that's true.
And then with the second one, you get this whole new, way more iconic villain that kept the franchise going for how long? 40 years now? 50 maybe?
Yeah, uh, pretty close. I think Friday the 13th came out in 1980, so pretty close.
There you go. There you go.
I think, and I don't know for certain, but there's a horror film, because if one of my friends, this guy
Hmm.
Doug Waugh, he's very big into, or he was very big into trauma films, and trauma,
Hmm.
they're not films that are like known for their like quality. They're more like, we're just going to make a movie because we can, and that I think in itself is very inspiring.
Hmm.
If you want to go out and make a film, even though it's not going to be like a $200 million blockbuster like
Oh
Oppenheimer,
yeah.
you're just
Hmm.
going out there, you're just trying to have fun with your friends, and that's fine.
Oh yeah.
But one of the films is that I think is one of his favorites is a film called Sleepaway Camp. I've never seen it.
I've heard of it. I have heard of it. I think there might have been a few video games based on it as well, if I recall correctly, but I have heard of it. Yes.
Yeah, I think that might be a knockoff of Friday the 13th, but don't quote me on it. And I think,
No, I think you're right. I think you're
and I think,
absolutely right.
yeah, I think that these three major films kind of created like a cottage industry of like VHS horror that I think I might
Hmm.
discuss next week. We'll see what I think about on that one. But
Hmm. Hmm.
yeah, the second era of horror I think is very interesting. And it's kind of surprising that you haven't checked too much of that out. But I understand why, because a lot of I was watching the first Halloween, I think last year or the year
Hmm.
before that, and I got the impression that, man, this is like a really good film.
Hmm.
And I can only imagine how people were when they watched this the first time it came out. But
Yeah,
like today,
that's a huge thing to talk about. Yeah.
I mean, today I don't think people would appreciate all the nuances of a film like that, because I think it's
Hmm.
a lot slower than films we are accustomed to today.
Hmm. No, I agree completely. I don't want to say desensitized because I think that word carries a lot of weight, but
Mhm.
yeah, today in the 21st century, you have so many horror films that go just so, or not even horror films sometimes. They just go so over the top with, whatever monster they choose or blood or gore or anything. So you look back on something like Halloween, the original, and you're like, "Oh, I can see how that would be scary for its time." But especially I think, my generation, Gen Z, like, the early 20 somethings, late teens, we're especially guilty of that.
Yeah, I mean, not that I want to beat up on you guys too much. You have a lot to
No,
deal
please
with because
do. Please
you guys are
do.
being in. Well, I'm saying you guys are inheriting a world that even I had no responsibility in like ruining it.
Hmm.
That I completely put on the boomers. So put me on record there. Make that a clip that out and make that a short. That, that Philip Leavenworth denounces the boomers. But
I can get behind that.
yeah, I mean, they're still the richest generation, at least in the United States. So I blame them for
Exactly.
a lot of that. But
Oh,
I
yeah.
mean, there's a lot of discussion about attention spans these days and how they're kind of shortening.
Yes.
And I don't know, like, do you have any older films that you think? I mean, this is kind of side chatter, but you have any older films that you think? And I mean, older, like from probably pre 1980, that you think are something you want to revisit a lot, or
Oh, absolutely. So before I was an English major, I was a film major through and through. That's what I applied to a lot of schools under, was a film major, graphic design major.
Hmm.
And I took 2 classes in community college. One was the exploration of film from the early 1900s to the 1940s. Then the other class was from film from the 1940s to the 21st century today. And one film that I love to go back to time and time again, that I could not get any of my friends to watch to save their lives, is Casablanca.
Huh.
That is something
Interesting.
that is, oh yeah, that's a movie I love to revisit whenever I can, either when I'm doing homework, when I'm just chilling out. That's a movie I can sit back and relax and watch that.
No, it's a good one. I think that's one of my favorites, even though it is older. What do you
Mhm.
think the issue is? Kind of bringing people over to a movie like that.
Definitely that it's I think it's a lot of things actually. I think, oh gosh, where do I start? Definitely it's definitely an attention span thing. There's no grand action set piece. I think, 90% of the movie takes place like in a bar.
Mhm.
And it's a lot of dialogue and it's a lot of talking. It can be considered historical in a lot of senses because this just happened during World War II. And a lot of people don't care for history nowadays. Um, and I would say, a good portion of that is also the dialogue. It's very calm dialogue. There's not a lot of yelling. There's not a lot of, we got to get this thing now. It's very calm, very orderly. I would even say, like, even the word choice that they use for that film is, they use words like we don't really use that much anymore, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're speaking to like the sort of, I don't know what you want to call it, like linguistic,
Yeah.
like proclivities of the era, like the 1940s. We use some idioms that they used back then, but it's
Oh,
not
yeah.
like a lot of them. And so,
Mhm.
yeah, I guess that could be an impediment. And
Yeah, with all,
that's
like,
kind of what you
the
say.
slang nowadays especially, that kills anything.
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the things I was concerned about going into teaching this semester at SDSU. I
Mhm.
was like, I'm going to be teaching, Gen Z kids that just came out of
Yeah.
high school, who went into high school at the start of the pandemic. So these people
Mhm.
are either going to be like, they're going to have some trouble. And what I found is they didn't like it either. Obviously, none of us like being in the pandemic, but
Yeah.
you know, they want to go out. And I think the pandemic did the opposite of what they thought they were talking about. Because I think in the beginning of the pandemic, there was a concern that younger kids would just kind of like become more insular and like kind of like
Mhm.
shy away from people.
Yeah.
But what I'm finding is the opposite happened. They want nothing but to be off the tech and just be with people.
Yes. No,
So
I notice both sometimes. I notice there's a lot of kids that, they wanna go to an in-person class. If a teacher says, "Let's go outside for the day," they're ecstatic to go outside. Then I see the other, side of it, which is, "You know what? I'm kinda tired today. I just wanna take my class on my computer and not talk to anybody today and just relax on my couch." And I'm guilty of that sometimes as well.
yeah,
But, being cooped up for 2 years, yeah, that does something to you.
I mean, I feel like it's going to be this, ripe opportunity. Now we're getting back to the actual core subject here
Mhm,
of a
yes.
slasher film done during the pandemic. I'm really curious to see what they do with that eventually. But
Mhm,
moving on to the next era of horror, of slasher horror, is apparently so in the 1990s, 1980s, there was like this kind of franchise fatigue.
yeah.
And it was kind of brought on by a bunch of like endless sequels because I think by the time we got to I think 1998, we had reached what me and my brother laughingly call Halloween Water H2O.
Mhm,
Because I guess they're celebrating the 20th anniversary of Halloween, and yeah, that's where things definitely take a turn.
mhm,
But
absolutely.
it's around that time they started thinking about ways to subvert the genre. So now the genre is kind of calling back to itself, and that's where you end up with your Scream films. And
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I guess for me, have you seen any of the what would you say is your favorite '90s horror slasher horror film, if you have one?
That is a fantastic question. I'm trying to think of like all the ones I either have or haven't seen specifically from the 90s.
Hmm.
The biggest one that comes to mind isn't a film, it's a miniseries,
Yeah, that's good enough.
and that would be the original It with Tim Curry.
That's a good pick.
That's
I
that's
mean,
something
that I
that
think.
that has like a pedestal, That's like one of the gold standards for horror nowadays, I think.
I mean, I think that's pretty good assessment. I mean, I know there was some discussion because I would count it as a slasher film because I mean, like, Pennywise is literally like, you know, getting rid of these kids
Oh
as they
yeah.
grow up into adults, little by little. And so
Mhm.
um, I always joke that it was co-created by cocaine because Stephen King at the time was, and we'll be covering Stephen King in a couple of weeks, but
Absolutely,
um,
yes.
I do like the fact that he doesn't really like to do interviews with people who are less than him
Oh, I know.
because I would love to have him on, but me telling him that would probably end up like he'll leave, he'll storm off, and be
Exactly.
like,
He'll just walk out.
I will have deserved it, but it would be glorious. But I don't hate on Stephen King. I'm just saying that if I was in his position, I'd do the same.
Hmm,
But yeah,
hmm.
you'd
On that,
mentioned, yeah,
go ahead.
no, you're good.
I was gonna say on that topic, so I have a question for you about a certain quote unquote slasher film. I want your opinion
Okay,
on it.
sure
So
thing.
this film came out in the late 80s, 1987 to be exact. And I'm very curious if you consider the original Predator with Arnold Schwarzenegger to be a slasher film.
Hmm. I think that's an example of the final boy.
Okay, okay. I can definitely, because I've heard a lot of arguments with that film specifically that like people say, "Oh yeah, it has, elements of a slasher and elements of a horror, but it's an action adventure film." And I'm like, is it though?
Well, I mean, let's look at the definition real quick again. So,
Let's do it. Yes.
the definition of slasher film, um, is basically a film that has a central killer. So
Mm-hmm.
in this case, it'd be the predator,
Yep.
a weapon of choice. What would you say? His whole arsenal is basically a weapon of choice.
I was gonna say he has several, but I think the most iconic would either be his shoulder-mounted blaster or the wrist knives.
Yeah, he has weapons of choice. That's
Hmm.
what we'll say. And he has a high body count. So,
Yeah.
given those criteria,
Sounds like a slasher to me.
sounds like a slasher. So, yeah, I mean, isn't it him? Because it's Schwarzenegger and it's the girl that he's with. I think
I
are
know.
the
I'm
final
looking at the
people.
cast right now. Oh god, I have no idea how
Is
to say this actress's name. Elpidia Carrillo? Something
okay.
along those
Yeah,
lines.
yeah. It's Schwarzenegger and her who are the final people that survive the film. So I guess in that one it'd be somewhat of. It's not an exception because it is still a final girl and a final,
Hmm.
call it, man. So I don't know.
Yeah,
I will
and
count
like
it.
yeah, and like he is the one that fights the predator at the end. He is the one who has to take on the monster at the end of the movie. So I think that definitely counts.
Yeah, I think we'll definitely count it then. We'll take 1 second for a tiny break
All
while I pay
right.
the bills to do our ad time. So let's see.
Okay.
Ad time. So the Scuttlebutt with the Phill podcast is brought to you by Vega Aerospace. Vega Aerospace. In space, no one can hear you. All right, now back to our show. So essentially, yeah, we've established that Predator is in fact a slasher film. We will make that a clip. We'll clip it out of the episode, and we'll make that a short because I want it to be something run through the entire halls of Congress if we have to. There
Oh
needs to
yeah.
be legislation.
It needs to be
We
known,
need
said, published worldwide. Yes.
exactly. So you heard it here, folks, that the Phill and the Mac, we're of the opinion that Predator is in fact a slasher film, and we will eventually I'll have to create a stamp that'll make that even more official.
And you can quote us
So
and fight us on that.
exactly, exactly. So with that, um, so yeah, we went over the franchise fatigue era, the sequels, and then the meta slashers, which kind of Scream brought that out, and then yeah, there's other stuff that I've been kind of brought to because apparently there's a lot of slasher films today that have been remade from older films that I wasn't even aware of.
Oh,
Because
thank
I
God we're
guess
going
there
to talk
was
about
a
this.
yeah, apparently there was a Black Christmas,
Yep.
which I remember seeing when I was a kid on like a poster somewhere,
Mm-hmm.
and then there was something called Prom Night,
Oh my God, yeah.
which I have not seen, and something called Maniac, something called The Burning. So at least two of these I've heard be remade, but
Mm-hmm.
yeah,
And if you
these
want to
films I'm
talk
not
about,
entirely sure.
oh yeah, if you want to talk about that, just recently, I think it was in 2020, we had that movie Freaky with Vince Vaughn and Catherine Newton,
Hmm.
which is kind of like a horror take on Freaky Friday.
Huh. I don't think I've
So,
seen that one.
I remember it was everywhere in 2020 because nothing else was being made at that time. But
Hmm.
yeah, it's a weird one because it's this like 40-something-year-old dude who is a serial killer, and like this 17-year-old girl who's just, a 17-year-old girl in high school, and they switch bodies. So suddenly, he's the teenager and she's the killer.
Huh.
So yeah,
And that's
that's
something
like
I do have to check out. Where'd you
there's
say it's
weird ones
available?
like
We can watch it.
that. From what I can see, it is available on Peacock.
Hmm. That's one of the streamers that I got rid of for a while, and then started having content, and then they told me to bring it back. So now I had to restart it. Forget why I
Yeah.
had to restart it, but yeah, definitely check that out, folks. It sounds interesting. And then yeah, a lot of these kind of films back then, I think they're definitely kind of aping off the success of other 70s, 80s horror films, and so I think that's where
Absolutely.
we get, as I mentioned earlier, the VHS horror era.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know how many of those you've seen from the 80s or 90s or 70s.
Mm-hmm. Here
Have you
and there,
seen any of those?
here and there, bit of them. I would need like some like named examples. I'd be like, oh yeah, no, maybe, kind of.
Yeah, I think we'll come back to that one in a minute. But
Mm-hmm.
yeah, the next era, because I think there's like two more eras of slasher that we can talk about.
Mm-hmm.
And that one, the next one is modern slashers. So that's from like the 2000s to now.
Oh yeah.
And so you end up with stuff like The Strangers, You're Next, and the Terrifier movies, which I've never seen, but people tell me a lot about them. So
And
I don't know if you've seen any of those.
those are like a big thing right now because of Art the Clown. He's like a really viral meme right now.
That's the character that we usually see on the posters.
Yes, I believe so.
Yeah, I think I'm largely unfamiliar with that franchise, but I know
No, me
that
too.
at least that character is very well known,
Mm-hmm.
and that makes me curious.
Agreed. Agreed.
Does any of these films sound familiar to you? Like, what was the? I mean, you mentioned Alien was your first like
Yes.
horror film, but what was one of the ones that you had seen growing up that came out at the same time that like basically freshly released film? What was the first horror film?
Oh God. Like I went to go like see like in the theater or something like that.
Yeah, something that was like came out right as you were growing up.
Oh God. I think the first horror movie that I actually like left my house to go see in a theater might have been It Chapter 2 with Bill Skarsgård.
Yeah.
Because at that time I was kind of like iffy on horror, you know? I'm like, oh, like, you know, I have school, I had to like, apply to colleges around that time. And I'm just like, oh, like, I don't really have time. And then one of my friends were like, let's go see it. And I'm like, all right, we'll go. So I went to go, and that was a really, really good time. Recently, because we were just talking about it, I did go see Alien Romulus,
Okay.
and that is a really good return to form for that franchise. That I would
Mhm.
definitely classify as a modern slasher film.
Most definitely. Actually, that was one of my. I think that one's another example of like a final girl, final man things. It's
Oh yeah.
she survives Rain, and then her brother Andy survives, and
Hmm.
that'll take us to the next thing, whatever that is. And
Oh yeah.
I saw it in the theater at Universal City Walk, and we were in this big because that's the big normal IMAX sized theater,
Yes.
and I mean I was blown away by it.
Oh yeah. And then I'm very excited to see what they do for that new FX series, Alien Earth. I wonder what that's going to be like.
Yeah, me too. I'm told it's supposed to be set even before Prometheus,
Prometheus.
so
Yeah.
I don't know how that's going to work, but
Me neither.
I mean we could make the argument. I think that the Alien franchise has always been sort of a slasher film
Oh
franchise,
yeah.
because everybody dies by the end of it. You usually
Absolutely.
end up with like one person or a cat, and
Hmm.
so you know I don't know what your feelings are on the Alien franchise as a whole, but what is your thoughts on the whole franchise, where it went?
You know, it had ups and downs. I have seen every single one of the Alien movies except for Alien Covenant.
Huh. Interesting.
That was before Romulus. That was the most recent one that I was told didn't do the best in terms of box office or ratings.
Hmm.
But the first, I think it's the first four with Sigourney Weaver. Those are all right. The first two are absolutely fantastic. They went from a horror movie to an action film, which I think only Alien really could have done.
It's probably true.
Um, the third and the fourth one, they're not the greatest.
Yeah.
Prometheus was a cool idea. I like how they kind of showed us like, oh, here's how the aliens started, all that stuff you saw in the first movie. Here's where it all came from. And then with Romulus and hopefully Alien Earth, I think they're really trying to keep that franchise going by returning to its roots. I hope it's what they're doing. I want to see more action horror slasher stuff. I don't want, like, oh, this is a clone of the original character. Surprise. I don't want any of that anymore for the love of God.
Yeah, I don't disagree with you. I think that personally, I do love the first two, and then Alien Three. I'm not a big fan of, strictly because I
Hmm.
guess I wanted Newt and Michael Baine's character to survive, and they kind of
Yep.
become like a surrogate family and do stuff together. But
It
yeah,
went
that didn't
completely the other
happen.
direction.
Yeah, and I'm just like, yeah, this isn't my favorite. And then the one after that, though, I'd like a little bit more. But yeah, I mean, the clone thing is a little bit kind of.
Yeah, yeah.
But no, I do recommend Alien Romulus. So those of you out there who are listening to the recommendation, that's 2 votes for Alien Romulus. So if you haven't seen it, definitely seek it out. I recommend it.
It's a worthwhile watch, indeed.
Yeah. The one film that I do want to talk about from the 2000s that I remember seeing when I was a kid, mind you, my mom was kind of the person who was like, I don't care if they're like 6 years old. I want to watch Saving Private Ryan. And so, you know, we did. And so, at 6 years old, I'm watching, the army troopers land on Omaha Beach and then getting like torn down by machine guns on the beach. And then my mom's like, wow, this is an amazing movie, and I'm over here being like traumatized by like people's heads being blown off and like
You
limbs
saw
flying
D-Day
everywhere.
when you were 6.
And I saw D-Day when I was 6, so it's like, yeah, that's not going to scar me ever. But afterwards, like 3 or 4 years later, I forget exactly when Saw came out, but when those movies came out, I remember seeing the first one. I thought the first one was pretty good,
hmm
and then because it was a nice little twist. I don't know if you've seen the Saw films.
Yes, I've seen the first one. Anything beyond that, I haven't really bothered with.
Yeah. My friend Doug, as I mentioned earlier, took us to go. I think this was like circa 2010.
hmm
This is the first time I've ever seen a movie like that in the theater. He went to bring us to watch Saw 3D, I think is the film.
Mm-hmm.
And that film, I swear, was like pure and utter brain rot.
Oh yeah.
And I was just like, I love my friend Doug or whatever, but it's like
hmm
you brought me to watch this thing, and I can't do it.
I forgot that era of film where if it was the third film in a franchise, it always had, the film name in 3D. I forgot that we had that era of film in like the late 2000s, early 2010s.
Yeah, I mean, it was Saw 3D, and then you had Spy Kids 3D somewhere in
Yep.
there, and yeah, it did happen. But I think Spy Kids 3D gave us Glenn Powell, so
That we
yes,
got
is
a
that
very, very young babyface Glenn Powell. Yes, we did.
exactly? So I mean, there's trade-offs, I suppose, but
hmm
yeah, beyond that, yeah, I mean, I do enjoy the idea of a slasher film. It depends on how gross we want to get it, and oftentimes, I mean, like I said, I saw D-Day when I was 6, so
Yeah.
I feel like I can tolerate a lot.
hmm
There's even stuff on Reddit like r/combat footage where it's like showing you people get like murked from like drones, and so
Yes.
it's like, it's a lot you can kind of be
There's a
desensitized to, and
lot you can do. Yes.
I don't
And
know if that's a good thing.
I would hope it's a good thing. 'Cause you asked that question earlier if I had any like recent slasher films I saw, and I was pausing. I'm like, I should have this, and I don't. There's a lot of horror films nowadays that are released that aren't slashers, that focus more on like the psychological horror behind something. And I really hope like the slasher genre doesn't start to die out.
I mean, with films like Alien Romulus, I think it's possibly in no danger of dying out. I
That's
think
what my
it'll
hope.
probably evolve, certainly,
hmm
but yeah, I agree with you.
And again, I hope like because you have like those like the theme park stuff that they have nowadays during October. You have horror nights, you have Scary Farm, Six Flags does something, and all those kind of place you in your own slasher film in some kind of way. You are essentially your own character going through these different aspects of different themes of horror, and you're going through what feels like a real slasher film in some cases, and people love that. Universal, I think, sells out every year. Knott's is always packed for like every single night they do Scary Farm. So I
Mhm.
hope at the very least that does prove that the genre isn't going anywhere, that it's just evolving. But it's hard to be sure.
I mean, yeah, I mean, when I'm back up in LA, I mean, I want to go to this thing called the Haunted Hayride, and
Yes, I've heard of that.
yeah, I recommend it. The last couple of years we've gone, it's kind of become like a impromptu tradition,
Oh yeah.
and
That's me with Scary Farm, absolutely.
yeah, I've never been to Not Scary Farm.
Oh, it's so much fun. It is so much fun.
My parents have been there supposedly, and I think it's funny that they've been there and I haven't. But um, my mom apparently doesn't like to go anymore because my dad would basically like tell her, "Hey, don't look over there," and then what does she do? She looks over there and gets
I do that with
terrified.
my friends all the time, and it never fails to make any of us laugh.
Yeah, I mean it's a great move, and unfortunately, my mom is like the most like on pins and needles person you'd ever run into. And so
Yeah.
I'm like, how? Like she's always on edge. And I'm like, I don't know why.
No. In my office, for example, where I work, I'm definitely like the person who loves horror the most out of our group. So I'm always asked like, "Oh, like if I'm gonna do Scary Farm or Universal this year, what should I do?" And I always say, "Go with Not Scary Farm." They have original houses, original ideas. Everything is built from the ground up. It's not like Universal where they have to rely on some kind of IP.
Right. Yeah, I mean, at least Universal can rely on that IP because I think more often than not they own it. But I
Yes.
do agree with you that it being beyond that, it can be a little bit more. I don't know what you want to call it, like more. I don't want to say relatable, but like there's something different about it that makes it a little bit more appealing if it's not always associated with some like major franchise.
Yeah. No, in my opinion, it adds the creative factor. The fact that, someone did come up with this idea and that they didn't really have any prior like property to go off on. They just said, "Hey, let's make a maze where there are giant black widow spiders that invade a retirement home and chase after you."
Yeah, I mean that's the. I mean they kind of do it at the haunted hayride, but it's like only like the last couple of years we've gone. It's only been like 3 scare houses,
Oh,
but
I gotcha.
they're they're pretty lengthy, and then they have like a food court thing, and then they have like a stage where someone's out there kind of like singing and kind of keep. It's like
Yeah.
a the hayride's supposed to be something that's like it's like a 1980s town, and it's kind of been like removed from time, sort of, and so you have a bunch of these weird creatures and stuff kind of roaming around, and then
Mhm, mhm.
yeah, you have not only that, but you also have the hayride itself. So you basically hop into like the back, like a trailer on the back of a tractor, and you slowly get sent through this maze,
Mhm.
and scare actors come and hop out and try to like terrify you. And a lot of times it's pretty good. A lot of times it's pretty scary. I think last
I
year
was
they
gonna
had a
say,
bunch of more.
is that one of
Yeah,
the like is that one like one of the events where like they can touch you and you can't do anything about it?
I believe so. I think you're actually supposed to sign a waiver when you go
Oh
into it.
Lord.
But
That's where I draw a line.
yeah, I think they're only allowed to touch you if you're like hanging off the edge.
Okay,
But
so
if
yeah, that's
like if
fair
you have a
game.
hand out or something, but outside of that, I don't think they're actually supposed to like touch you. At least as far as I
Okay.
remember recall.
I
But
gotcha, I gotcha.
no, the axe throwing is what they do the little waiver for. So they're not
Mhm,
responsible for if you slash yourself. So,
mhm. Oh, you
but
do
no, I
remind me of
recommend it.
something if you wanna get into that.
Go ahead.
So, definitely going back on when we just talked about how slasher films might be dying out, might not be. There
Hmm.
are other pieces of evidence that say, "No, they're still alive and well." There is, an axe-throwing bar in Costa Mesa called Slashers. Have you heard of that?
No, it's the first time I'm hearing about it.
So, yeah, it's an axe-throwing bar, so, it is an actual bar, and then, the whole thing is, like, much like a bowling alley, bring your friends, throw axes, get points, that kind of stuff. But it's entirely themed around slasher villains and slasher films. And they have just pieces of decoration. One of my really good friends, Gabby, she works there, and I've been meaning to go for literally forever. But just the theming they have and the decorations they have, it's super horror, super slasher, and from what I hear, just it's always busy. There's always people there having a good time. So I'm like, okay, that's another good indicator that through one way or another, these films are alive and well.
Yeah. You said Costa Mesa. I'll have to check that out.
Hmm, hmm.
Let that be a lesson to you folks. Try new things. But
Try new things.
yeah, beyond that, yeah, I mean, there's only another, I think, one era to discuss, and this is kind of like the main one that we're kind of associated with right now because
Hmm.
we're in the remake reboot era of horror
Oh
right
yeah.
now. I don't know if you want to watch because I know they came out with Halloween, I think back in 2018, and that was kind of
Yes.
they were picking up off of I think the first 2 films. No, the first film.
I think the first film, and then everything else was regarded as quote unquote not canon. Yeah,
Yeah, so forget all the 40 years of other films.
exactly.
And then I haven't seen. I saw that one, and I really enjoyed it, but I haven't seen Halloween Kills or Halloween Ends. Those
I
are the
think it's
last
Halloween Ends,
two.
if I recall correctly.
Yeah, so I haven't seen those two yet, and so at some point I hope to, because what I'm
No,
told,
same.
the second one is not good apparently, and that's what piques my interest. Because you go from
Yes,
like a really good film to like one that's kind of like shit, and so I'm like, I want to know more. And
that's what
then
I've heard as well. Like, it's not a satisfying ending. It's an ending, but it's not the best, is what I keep hearing.
yeah, which to me, I mean, that's just on par with with the Halloween franchise. I mean, there's a Halloween film, I forget what it's called. I think it starts with an R. Halloween. I want to say Halloween Resurrection, but don't quote
Mm,
me on it. And I think in that one is the one with Buster Rhymes or something because he like says "trick or treat, motherfucker," and he's like
that's
drop
that
kicks.
sounds about right.
Yeah, he drop kicks Michael Myers outside of a fucking window,
Yep,
and
that
that
sounds about
alone is something I want to sit down and actually watch one Halloween
right.
um, marathon. Because I don't know about you if you do it or not. I imagine you kind of do something similar,
Oh,
where during the month of October you kind
I've
of
already
pick a different
started.
set of films. You already
I've
started your
already
marathon.
started. Um,
Yeah.
there's one I just watched the other night. It's with Johnny Depp and Christina Ricci. It's Sleepy Hollow,
Okay.
and it's a retelling of the original Washington Irving short story. And it's directed by Tim Burton. It's very campy, also very like disgusting and kind of gory a little bit. But that also might fall under the genre of slasher because the headless horseman is going around killing everybody.
Yeah, I think that's pretty apt.
No,
I mean, I'm
that's a
told.
good one. I recommend that one.
Yeah. Um, Speaking of this remake era, apparently they want to remake I Know What You Did Last Summer, and actually, I've never seen that movie,
Oh, I heard
but
about that. Yes.
apparently they want to redo it already. And it's only been like
Yes.
maybe 20, 30 years since the
Yep.
last one came out. So
Yep.
I'm curious to see what they do.
And then on topic of like remakes and reboots, well, they're not technically slash films, although maybe they could have been if they did get greenlit and made. I constantly think about Universal's Dark Universe and how it never got off the ground.
That's a whole, separate discussion. I mean, just
That's a
because
whole other thing.
it's such a emblematic thing about like how everybody was racing to find the next thing that was going
Hmm.
to make them a lot of money.
The answer
Like,
to the
what could we
MCU,
have?
yes.
Yeah. And they're like, what can we do to have our own little MCU? I got it. Let's do all these like Universal monsters. And I'm like, in concept, it sounds great.
Hmm.
In execution, apparently, it did not work.
It did not work.
I've never seen any of them, so that's another reason why I think it did not work.
Yep, fair,
Uh,
exactly.
I heard nothing about them. I don't know about you.
Oh, I heard several things if you want to get into it, but I know we're talking about slasher films.
Well, I guess maybe we'll have to say that for another episode. But generally speaking, it is not a good thing when they have all your main actors, Russell
Mhm.
Crowe, Tom Cruise, and all the Johnny Depp, all the
Johnny Depp,
go up and take a production photo, and it doesn't do anything. It doesn't go anywhere. There's nothing
which, by the way, according to a lot of sources, that was photoshopped.
really.
Yep, that's what I hear. No one's confirmed it or not, but
You know
supposedly that
what?
was a photoshopped photo.
You know what? I wouldn't be surprised, to be honest.
Mm-mm. Me neither.
I feel like that's just the right level of laziness that I would expect.
Especially from mid 2010s Universal. Yes.
We are. I don't even know anymore. I mean, at least the big
We've
budget
lost the
films,
floor.
coming from the big studios, I guess I'm a little kind of less than
No,
optimistic.
no, me. That's why you have companies like A24 who have gone on to do like Midsommar and Hereditary and X. That these are huge horror films for our current generation, our time right now. And none of them had that big universal budget.
No, I think that's right. I mean, you were already mentioning a few. The last segment of our show here can talk about the A24 films and including X and Midsommar and all these. I mean,
Mhm.
I feel like A24 is just hitting it out of the park with their getting great directors to direct and write great work.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Because I mean, what was your thoughts on the Ari Aster films, Midsommar and Hereditary?
Okay, so do you want the backstory for this?
Absolutely.
So at the time I watched Midsommar for the first time, I was going through my first major breakup,
Mm,
and just I wouldn't leave the house. I was so like distraught and upset. I would just stay home all day. And one of my best friends, Stella, who also loves horror, by the way, I told her to listen to this.
mhm,
Um, she was like, "Hey, it's on Amazon for free right now, Midsommar. I know you want to watch it. How about I come over and we'll watch it together?" And I'm like, "Absolutely." So she sat down, I sat down. I had no idea what to expect from it. And then I sat down, I watched it, and I look at her, I'm like, "What the fuck was that?" It was brilliant, and in my opinion, just like a masterclass, not only in like, body horror and suspense, but I'm also just like, that was not at all what I expected. And same with Hereditary as well. That was just, I didn't know what to expect going into it. And again, the body horror in Hereditary as well. And I'm thinking of that one scene at the end of the film where I forget her name, but it's that headless body that just floats into the treehouse.
mhm.
Chills up my I still think of that. It's
Yeah.
just horrifying.
Honestly, you mentioning it sent that image through my head, and I got a little bit of chills.
Exactly.
Um,
And there's
yeah,
just
no, that was
silence
crazy.
in that scene. There's no music. It's just silence.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, that's the kind of thing, and we're gonna kind of go over an hour, so I hope that's okay. But
Okay.
the thing about that film though is like Hereditary is kind of. I mean, I feel like Ari Aster as a filmmaker has some problems,
Agreed.
and the reason I say this is obviously in Hereditary, it's a film basically about the disintegration of a family.
Yep.
And it's so good that I wonder if this is like something that happened in his own life, and that kind of concerns me. And
No,
then,
absolutely. Same with Midsommar. That is to
yeah,
show, if I'm gonna I'm gonna phrase this horribly, but that is to show just like the worst breakup imaginable.
yeah. I mean, Midsommar is definitely 100% a slasher film of a separate type,
Of a separate type,
because
exactly.
everybody's dead pretty
Exactly.
much by the end, except Florence Pugh's character,
Mhm,
and she's the final girl. But at the end of it, like whatever kind of Swedish cult village this is, that is the main thing that
mhm.
could be the sort of central villain.
Oh, yeah.
She joins the villains essentially.
Mhm. I was gonna say, yeah, she's the final girl, but at what cost?
Yeah, yeah. It's an interesting subversion to the trope. And then what else do we have? I don't know if you've seen that other one he did, Bo's Afraid. I haven't seen it. Everybody talks shit about it, so I haven't seen it.
I keep seeing, like, previews for it. I keep hearing people talk shit. I'm like, maybe I don't need to watch that one, at least not alone.
Yeah, yeah, probably not.
Nah.
I'm not really seeking it out, that's for sure.
No, me as
But
well.
yeah, outside of that, we also have the A24 films, the X series, and
Yep.
I've seen all of them. And a little bit of backstory on my thing when I went to watch
Mhm.
X the first time, because I saw the trailer
Please.
separately, and the trailer I thought was this is gonna be like a shitty, like little like an homage to the '70s horror film.
Mhm,
And then when I watched it and I was sitting through it, I was like, wow, I was blown away. And then by
mhm.
the end of the film, I was like, the the sheriff basically says, because they found the footage
Yep.
of this like tape, and it's like, "Yeah, you want to watch this?" It's like, no, it's just probably some fucked up horror picture. And I'm like, you know what? This is the start of something that's going to be memorable. Whatever this is, I'm going to be seated for whatever it is
Yep.
for this series, and I have not been disappointed.
God, no, I got to go watch all three.
Yeah, I think where do we watch them? Because we watched X and Pearl, and
Mm-hmm.
then Maxine we watched separately, but I watched Maxine with my brother,
Mm-hmm.
I think last month, and I forget what streamable platform we watched it on, but
They always change nowadays. I'll find it.
yeah, I think it might have been Apple, but I'm not sure. But
It
either
could be
way,
Apple, it could be Paramount Plus, it could be
yeah,
Prime, it
yeah, I'm
could be
not entirely
literally
certain. But if it is any of those, definitely for those of you in the audience that are watching us, definitely seek them out. I think it's a very solid new trilogy that had nothing that came before it. It's
Mm-hmm.
completely been it's its own original idea, and I think we need to support those as often as we can.
The cast is fantastic. They all have remarkable talent in their own right, especially Mia Goth. Holy shit.
Yeah, she's a force.
She acts circles around everybody in those films.
It's quite surprising, especially since in the first film she's actually playing two different
Two
roles,
different
both
characters,
both
exactly.
both as the protagonist and the villain. So
Yep.
it's definitely something you all should check out. But even beyond that, so I love the X films, and it was the definite surprise. And then what I also want to get into as well, because I think the primary force in slasher films these days, I think the gravity is like moving toward A24's direction,
Mm-hmm.
whereas you do have the other guys like Blumhouse and I
Yes.
think Monkey Paw Productions are doing their own things. We can get into them too a little bit, but I don't really consider maybe because I mean Get Out isn't really like a slasher film necessarily, although a lot of people do die.
Yeah. I can definitely see an argument if someone wanted to say Get Out's a slasher film. I can see the argument, but it, like the criteria you mentioned before that meets a slasher film, I'm like, no, like it doesn't really match any of that criteria.
Yeah, okay, I guess I would kind of consider Get Out to be sort of like slasher film adjacent,
Mm-hmm.
but not exactly
That's a good
slasher
way to put
film.
it, I think. That's a good way to put it.
Yeah, and then the other film he did, Us, I feel like that is closer to a slasher film.
Absolutely.
So I think we'll consider Us a slasher film.
I think same goes for Nope as well, because a lot of people die in that film. The creature, the monster, does have a primary way of killing said people. That one as well, again, I think might be arguable to be a slasher film, perhaps.
Maybe. I mean, I think
Maybe.
in that one you end up having a final group, I guess, which I guess is now a further of a subversion of the whole trope, because you ultimately end up with um, Daniel Kaluuya's character, his sister, and then their buddy, and that's pretty
Yes.
much the team that survive.
Yep.
The buddy from Rise Electronics, and
Yes.
so we'll consider for the purposes of this podcast. Nope and Us are fit more of the criteria of slasher films than Get Out does.
Absolutely.
But yeah, I think I don't know if you've been to Universal at least in the last couple of years, but I know they did a
Mhm.
whole. They put in the Jupiter's Claim
Yep.
set.
I've walked through it.
Yeah, I never had a chance to walk through it, so you could definitely have that one over me. But
It's still there. It's still, you can go walk through
yeah,
it. Hmm.
I need to go back. I mean, I miss Universal, but yeah, my fiance and I we used to go to Universal and Disneyland all the time, but then we rapidly ran out of money, and we're like, okay, we got to stop this. It's really expensive. And then
Hmm.
Disneyland started like shutting down stuff, and so we stopped going because it's like, why am I going to go to Disneyland when like
Yeah.
half of everything's closed?
Oh, I know. I know the feeling.
Well, I think maybe not next year, but the year after, I'll probably resuscitate that.
Absolutely. No,
I mean,
everything's closed right now, but when things open back up, go for it. Especially the Haunted Mansion. That I'm excited to go back on when the refurbishment's done.
Yeah, I think that's going to be quite a thing. Have you ever seen any of these films that kind of seem like A24 films, but they're not?
Oh gosh.
Because I'm told there's a movie called Mandy that isn't an A24 film, but it feels like one.
I think
And
I've
that's
heard of that one. Nothing currently comes to mind where it kind of has that independent style, but isn't.
yeah,
I actually had a question for you kind of along those lines as
sure.
well. I was gonna say, have you
Shoot.
seen a slasher film that isn't a horror film?
Slasher film that isn't a horror film.
Correct. This is something
What would
new
you?
that I keep hearing about in kind of the film community. Like, oh yeah, you can have a slasher film or a film that could be considered a slasher film where it is this one character or group of characters that just go around murdering people, but it's not horror.
I
And
think.
the strongest contender I keep hearing for that is the John Wick franchise.
Huh. Actually, I think I can agree with that. I mean, I guess we can call it a slasher film without ending up being a horror film. Because I mean, just look at John Wick 4, where he
Yes,
basically murders the population of a small town,
exactly.
and you know, it's nothing in it is like horrific necessarily if you don't count all the death, but
Well, I was gonna say there are some kills, especially in I think the third movie, that you just go, "Oh my god!" Like it depends. It truly does depend.
yeah, no, I think it does. I was starting to think about kind of going wider a little bit. We'll try to wrap up soon, but
Absolutely.
yeah, the films by Robert Eggers. I don't know if you've seen any of his work.
Yes, 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 yeah. I am so excited for Nosferatu.
Same here. I think it's being released in the wrong month though, but
Agreed.
I guess I'm not alone in that. I thought I was the only one, but
No, I really hope that doesn't like kind of keep the curse of December and January horror films of, if it comes out in those 2 months, it's dead in the water immediately.
yeah,
I hope that won't be the case because I am excited to go see it and it looks fantastic,
yeah. I
but
mean,
we shall see.
that's true. I mean, I loved The Witch.
Hmm.
I think we can also consider that something of a slasher film because I mean the whole family dies except for Anya Taylor
I think
Joy.
so.
So
I think so, yes.
yeah, and then what was the other one he did after that? It's The Lighthouse.
Mm,
I don't consider The Lighthouse to be a slasher, even though it's like that's more of like a psychological horror film.
yeah. That's one that's been on my list for a long time that I haven't gotten around to watching yet.
Yeah, I really do recommend it. It's something else. There's a monologue that Willem Dafoe gives in there that I swear is the
No,
best monologue
I've
I've
seen that
ever heard.
scene. I've seen it
Yeah,
parodied so many times.
it's so
For
good.
that reason alone, I want to see it.
No, I really recommend it. I actually liked The Northman a lot, but that's not really a horror film. And then, yeah, we're looking forward to Nosferatu whenever I get a
Whenever
chance to
that
watch
drops,
that. Hopefully,
yes.
it'll be, I think it's Christmas is when it comes out, but I don't know if I'm
I
going to
think it
be.
was like, yeah, December 26th or 27th. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think I'm going to be trying to watch a horror film on Christmas or New Year, but you never know. Weirder things
You
have
never
happened.
know.
Yeah, but I don't know. Have you ever seen a film called It Follows?
I've heard of it. I have not seen it.
Well, that's another one I recommend. And oh, the other film I wanted to mention too is a film called
Hmm.
Talk to Me.
Also on my list. That one I've heard
Yeah,
great things about. And that's another A24 film too.
very true. That's why they're hitting it out of the park with horror. They
They
don't get it
really
wrong.
are.
And the crazy thing about Talk to Me is it's a film made by just YouTubers.
Yep.
These guys came out of nowhere. A couple Australian guys like, hey, we got this idea, and then my brother recommended it to me, and I'm like, I don't know, it seems kind of weird. And then
Hmm.
I guess he went to watch it with his girlfriend, and then they were like completely like blown away by it. I'm like, okay, now I got to watch it.
Now we got to watch it.
And
Exactly.
I watched it. I'm like, wow, this really is pretty damn
Hmm.
good. So yeah, I would say extend that to you to check out It Follows and
Absolutely.
Talk to Me whenever you get a chance. But yeah, I think as a whole, I mean, thank you for coming to the show.
Hmm. Thank you for having me. This was a pleasure.
Yeah, of course. If at all you're ever interested in coming back to the show, this month is going to be horror month. I don't know
Hmm.
how interested you are in discussing anything of fantasy, but
Very much
next
so.
month
Yes,
will be horror month,
absolutely.
or it'll be fantasy month next month. So,
Okay. Yeah. If you're willing to have me back, absolutely.
no, more than willing to have you. I've lost my notes. I need to get them back. There we go. So, with that, so next week we'll be covering, I believe the topic is, and usually I have these things ready to go, and now I don't. What's going on?
That's why we have
So,
editing. It's okay.
yeah, it's the problem with these live streams. It kind of, I mean, we'll edit the stuff in post usually, but
Absolutely.
at least in the short stuffs. But
One of my favorite bits is, oh, we'll edit that, but we won't. But we can, but we won't.
I mean, it's pretty good. Yeah, basically for the rest of the month we have. Next week we'll be talking about analog horror. The week after that we'll be diving into the entire works of Stephen King, and then the week after that we'll be diving into my own creative story called Cherryfield, and that's going to be kind of a deep dive, sort of like how we did,
Hmm.
uh, sort of a deep dive on my other story uh, novel series called From the Earth to the Stars. We did that
Yes.
last week, so we can kind of keep that tradition going. And the next month, we'll be covering Lord of the Rings, Harry Potter, Arthurian legends, and then we'll finish out Fantasy Month with Avatar: The Last Airbender. And
Woohoo.
then we'll be having a lot of fun with all of that. So if any of that sounds interesting to you, definitely hit me up on the other side of this. Um,
Absolutely.
yeah, so be sure to tune into those episodes, those of you in my audience that are still with us. And if that strikes your interest, yeah, please tune in. So with that, remember, folks, don't panic. And as always, don't forget your towel. And until next time, I've been the Phill, and this has been Scuttlebutt with the Phill. And Mac, if you want to sign off too.
Yep. Just thank you for having me. To anyone who's listening, thank you for listening. And I hope to be back sometime soon.
Well, you definitely will, as long as we can make some compromises with your scheduling, of course. But
All
we'll definitely
right.
have
Of
you back on.
course.
So with that, folks, so long, and thanks for all the fish.